not only because CREID offers such a holistic approach to the work they do, which makes it very easy to kind of explain the relevance of FoRB to other areas and pressing issues, but also because they're going to be talking about lessons learned and both policy and programming, which it will hopefully be something of a positive event, whereas so often on FoRB issues it's a bit more depressing as there's so much to be done in the world. I'd just like to take a very quick moment to say that any recommendations or actions going forward that you mentioned today, notes will be taken and passed on and circulated with MPs and peers. So hopefully the impact of this event will be wider than just what is here in this hour and a half. Secondarily, the event will be recorded, so if you'd like your comments taken off the record, just let Emily know in the middle if you're asking questions. And finally, if you're not on the email list for the All Party Parliamentary Group for Freedom of Religion or Belief, please do let me know afterwards, as I'd love to badger you and fill your inbox. Thank you very much to Fiona Bruce. Over to her.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Portia, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a privilege to be here. I'm wearing at least two hats. I'm here in my capacity as Vice Chair of the All Party Parliamentary Group for International Religious Freedom or Belief, and I'm delighted that our chair, one of our chairs, Jim Shannon MP, is here, our other chair being Baroness Cox from the Lords. I'm also delighted that there are a number of parliamentary colleagues here. We've got on my right Lloyd Russell Moyes MP, who will be speaking later, member of the APPG, and also Andrew Lua MP and George Howarth MP, also supporters of our group. And the other hat that I'm wearing is as the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief, and I'm delighted to say that hiding at the back, but very important to supporting my role, is the Prime Minister's Deputy Special Envoy on Freedom of Religion or Belief, David Burrows. So welcome to you all, and thank you to Mariz Tadros for inviting me to share this event. I'm a huge admirer of CREID, the Coalition for Religious Equality and Inclusive Development, which was convened in 2018 by the Institute of Development Studies, and it has a number of strategic partners, and we'll be hearing from speakers today who represent them, from the Khoei Foundation. I hope I've got that reasonably well pronounced, Maryam, Kanwer, and I'll introduce her more later. And then also we have Claire Thomas from the Minority Rights Group International. Delighted that you're with us today. Thank you so much for joining us. And as I say, CREID has been going about 4 years, and its work now has spanned 33 countries. It's primarily focused working with marginalised communities in Egypt, India, Iraq, Nigeria and Pakistan. And it's been addressing the issues of poverty and freedom of religion or belief in these communities, particularly marginalised communities there. It's done some really good on-the-ground research, original research, working with individuals in those communities, and indeed funded by UK Aid Connect. UK Aid Connect was premised on the following idea: that no single development actor has all the answers to the problems facing the poorest, most excluded people, and recognising that problems are complex and interconnected. And CREID is just a prime example of looking at how those interconnecting problems can be addressed. And so through its interactions, CREID has produced a unique body of research which covers, for example, the effectiveness of humanitarian programmes when religious inequalities are not addressed. There are very few humanitarian programmes which clearly address religious persecution and discrimination, but Mariz's leadership has produced some wonderful research by CREID, looking, for example, at how the experiences of women from religious minorities have been affected by discrimination, the impact of COVID-19. They've worked with local organisations to create citizens' blogs and media coverage, and they brought together faith leaders, human rights activists and policymakers. They've trained young people, they've run education and awareness campaigns, they've created practical on-the-ground development projects such as the installation of street lights and water filtration plants in low-income neighbourhoods, and much more. I'm glad it ends there because I'm beginning to feel quite exhausted about what you have done. And I know that's the tip of an iceberg because I have read CREID's reports and they are really, really impressive. You have dedicated time to bring together a host of players from different disciplines, and you've made FoRB really relevant to so many other areas of inequality and looked at how these compound and affect one another. So thank you so much for all that you do. I'm going to stop there because otherwise I could go on forever talking about CREID's work. Let's have a look now at what the purpose of today's event is. What does this mean, looking at promoting freedom of religion or belief for all? Well, we want to ensure that wherever people are, they have this freedom. What's the good of having the freedom, for example, to practice your faith if you're trapped in poverty due to education or employment discrimination, or if women feel unable to leave their homes or their neighbourhoods without fear of being sexually assaulted or abducted for forced conversion? What if young people feel scared or intimidated by hate speech targeting them either in person in their communities or on social media? All of this is work that CREID has addressed. So we're here today to learn about what the evidence CREID's collected and some of the implications of the solutions that CREID can have for us, those of us who are working in this field. So thank you everyone for gathering. Our first speaker, and our speakers are going to speak for about 7 minutes each, and I shall try my school mom stare. My mother, my mother was a school teacher. She could stop a child at 200 paces with her look. I haven't quite got that, but I'll quietly try to indicate. So let me introduce Maryam more detailedly to you. Maryam Kanwer is a human rights activist. Her work focuses on youth development and persecution of marginalised groups based on their ethnic and religious backgrounds in Pakistan. She's been advocating for the rights of minority communities for over 13 years and has worked with CREID as a researcher for over 4 years now, and leads the CREID work as well as advocacy there, working at the Khoei Foundation. Would you give a warm welcome, please, to Maryam?
Thank you very much, Fiona, and everyone present in this room. Thank you very much, Portia, Jem, APPG, and International Freedom of Religion and Belief. So briefly, I'll talk about our CREID work in Pakistan. In Pakistan, we are working under the coalition building theme with an aim to study, document, and decrease the marginalization of religious minority communities by promoting freedom of religion or belief or none. Since these communities are facing extreme marginalization in every form of life and are socially excluded, through our work we have established networks amongst youth, women, and various stakeholders. We have focused on the communities and neighborhoods facing extreme poverty and marginalization, built capacity of local grassroots community women, youth activists, mobilizers, and leaders by supporting them with available resources or small grants so they can identify, lead, and implement the most crucial development needs in their neighborhoods in available resources. And we had adapted a local term, Ravadar, that means someone who accepts others with an open mind, and formed Ravadar committees of local women and community activists who actively participated and led the work in their communities. We have seen that this has resulted in uplifting their morale and the sense of community among the residents in these respective neighborhoods. A very brief background to our intervention is, as we all are very well aware of the plight of religious minority communities in Pakistan, more to it that we have observed how youth and women among these communities, they experience further marginalization due to their vulnerability. Lack of education, unemployment, poverty, and constant discrimination have badly affected the youth, and as a result, many young men in these communities, specifically in Christian communities, turn to drug and alcohol. Women, on the other hand, are rarely seen actively engaging and participating in community issues, And we have noticed their voices are totally missing from community affairs due to being part of our patriarchal society. So through CREID program, we have worked in 6 neighborhoods with Christian low-income neighborhoods, Joseph Colony and Johanabad in Lahore, Rimsha Colony, 66 Quarter, again 2 Christian informal settlements in Islamabad, the capital of Pakistan, 1 Shia low-income neighborhood in Islamabad and 1 in Karachi, Balti Basti. In every neighborhood, we worked with local interlocutors and community activists with an approach that allowed us to study and understand the local dynamics first, established connection between our local partners and these community people. And we used participatory methodology developed by brilliant colleagues at the IDS that helped us building consensus in a democratic way and help the residents in prioritizing their issues based on the most urgent needs of the neighborhood. In Joseph Colony, for example, which is a poor Christian neighborhood of around 2,000 residents in Lahore, in the Punjab province of Pakistan. So in 2013, over 150 homes and 2 churches were burnt by an extremist mob over a false accusation of blasphemy, which has become unfortunately a norm in Pakistan. And with this traumatic past that had only worsened the living conditions for them, the residents had to travel to neighboring Muslim community to access clean drinking water despite the hostile environment. And it was specifically difficult for women to access the water due to the distance. And our local partners, they worked with the community members to install a water filtration plant that, according to locals, the local neighborhoods, they were demanding for past 20 years. The community invited the local MP for the launch, and that helped actually boosted their morale from the stories we have been hearing. In 66 Quarter and Rimsha Colony, the 2 other poor Christian settlements, we worked with the local women. Most of them, they either work as domestic help or daily wage workers. And Rimsha Colony is again an informal settlement at the outskirts of Islamabad with no water, electricity and basic necessities. In 2013, when a minor 7-year-old Rimsha Masih was charged with false blasphemy allegation, the government had moved the entire neighborhood to this piece of land due to fear of violence against them by the extremist mobs. So we supported women to organize health camps for their fellow community women and children. And here I would like to share some reflections. So we have learned that one of the reasons why we as CREID have been successful in working with these communities is the strategy and the methodology. Throughout the entire process, we took participatory approach, where our work and research were guided by the communities we have been working with. This helped us and our local partners to build and develop mutual trust, without which intervention would not have been possible at all. And these communities, because they don't trust outsiders and even the NGOs at times. So we have learned that the need is to invest more development energy and resources into these communities in terms of education, creating opportunities, especially for women and youth, strengthening and building capacity. And they can be achieved by A, investing time, B, listening to them and their grievances that we have learned that this is so important, and adapting a flexible approach because their lives are not easy at all. And then women participation. So I want to stress that women are crucial behind community ownership of any project, and we have learned that they bring nuances. So we were able to help them forming women-only committees to work for the issues specific to the women. And we have learned that the small-scale, tangible projects that contribute or positively affect their daily lives, such as installation of lights, as you mentioned, organizing health camps that are focused on women and children with a bottom-up approach, can be helpful in reducing their daily sufferings and engaging these disenfranchised and secluded communities. And these projects may not necessarily and obviously cannot end their sufferings, but bring significant change in amplifying their visibility into the development and also encourage women participation. And I would emphasize to create flexible funding opportunities, projects that invest in local organizations, local community women, local youth, and support and facilitate community activist projects that are led and owned by the community. And these learnings can also be used for the future UK policy. And if I have a minute, I would like to share a quote of a female resident of 66 quarter. So these are the words of a female resident, Huma Amini, from 66 quarters, a Christian slum in Islamabad. People are happy because lights and cameras stop others from throwing garbage in the nala, the sewage. Children also play in the light after dark. Now they can play safely. I can go to the other side of the colony without any fear, and this is our committee's achievement. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Maryam. There's so much there that you've given us, and I want to thank you for conducting this kind of research, because it doesn't come without risks, and it needs to be done very sensitively. And I can tell from the way that you presented that you're very much aware of that sensitivity. So thank you so much, and don't worry about time, because I realised as you were speaking that the clock up there had stopped. So, but we're now going to move on to our next speaker, and I'll watch my watch this time. So Claire Thomas. Claire is Deputy Director of Minority Rights Group International. With more than 15 years experience with Minority Rights Group, Claire oversees 4 key areas. These are programme design, fundraising, always a difficult one, human resources and monitoring. And Claire has a special interest in cultural programmes, advocacy strategies and techniques, gender, intersectional discrimination, as well as the 2030 SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. So a great deal there for you to cover, Claire. Please do begin. Let's see how we go.
Okay, well, I'm only going to talk about the CREID work and about other stuff, but I'll try and, I think what I'm going to do after Maryam is maybe take you up a level, because although CREID has that participatory, community-based approach throughout all of its work, the work we did, which was primarily focused on hate speech, did work at a slightly higher level, although with those roots in the community. So we worked in Iraq and Pakistan and Myanmar, although we had to leave Myanmar very tragically after the coup because we couldn't continue working on hate speech there. And we wanted to understand hate speech. We wanted to understand how hate speech impacted on individuals and how it impacted on their poverty or their ability to lift themselves out of poverty. And it was very interesting how hate speech did interfere. I mean, at a very basic level, with face-to-face hate speech, so things that were said or signs put up said X not welcome in this shop, or people who were trading together, doing business, contracting together. The minority communities always knew that they were vulnerable to an allegation of blasphemy or some kind of other hate speech directed at them by the majority community, which could really undermine any possibility of them doing business or starting a business, or even disputes about land or disputes, even nurses, even in hospitals, hate speech has interfered with people's ability to go about their normal daily working life. So we really wanted to understand this, and we took a slightly different approach because we looked at hate speech across a number of communities, both in Iraq and then in Pakistan after we'd left Myanmar. And we saw how complex it was, how mobile and flexible it was, how it shifted in response to external events, and how difficult it was to kind of put your finger on it, because it was a bit like mercury, kept kind of getting away from us or from the people we were working with who were trying to understand it. But also we wanted to understand, can something be done about hate speech? And we worked with these positive messaging campaigns whereby in Iraq, journalists were trained to think about the language they were using in their articles. And a lot of this hate speech, people become very inured to it. It becomes a very common way of speaking, and people just kind of accept it more or less as normality, even though when you look at the psychosocial impact on religious minority communities, it's incredibly damaging to have these terms used about you day in, day out. So just having these positive messages was a huge morale booster for the minority community members, women and men, children, but also it resulted in different policy decisions. So clinics that had remained closed for 5 years, serving the Khoei community in Iraq, were suddenly staffed again, and this was during COVID, so having access to a clinic was pretty important at that particular moment. Other things happened. So in Pakistan, we had youth groups who were trained on what hate speech was and how they could counter it, and they then set about doing stuff in their colleges and their universities, educating another set of students about this phenomenon and how it can actually be tackled. And again, using the youth, that was a really positive way forward. We did some legal cases just to take us off hate speech. In Pakistan, it's quite common for jobs for the lowest menial workers to be advertised as only non-Muslims need apply or only Christians need apply. It's directly discriminatory against every UN commitment that Pakistan has made, and our partners brought a legal case on that point. We're still waiting for the Supreme Court to rule on it, but in the meantime, the authorities have actually responded. And a number of provinces have said this is not acceptable, we have to stop doing this. Still a few of those adverts are slipping through, but they're far fewer than they were. So that's a really positive achievement in the kind of long term in terms of sustaining a new way forward for some of those very, very marginalised communities. So we eventually brought all our experiences together in this toolkit, which is available online for anybody who wants to think about how they can tackle hate speech if they're impacted by it. It is very focused on religious minorities, but it's also relevant to others. So if you're working with communities, it literally takes the words of people in Myanmar, in Iraq or in Pakistan. It tells you how they did it, how anyone in many world contexts, which are quite difficult to work in, can do something similar. Other things we produce, I'll just share with you. It's very useful. Everyone talks about hate speech, but what are the terms that are actually offensive? This is not available online. So when we deliberately didn't put it online because we were worried that people who wanted to misuse it would access it there. But if you're a diplomat turning up to start your work in Islamabad, you might hopefully get given one of these, and you'll know that when somebody says this word, you shouldn't repeat it. This is not a word that, as a diplomat, you should be using. So, in terms of the learning, I mean, we struggled with a lot of social and political change in both countries, particularly Iraq. So the kind of legal case success we had in Pakistan, we probably couldn't have in Iraq because things weren't functioning and there was a lot of political turmoil across the period we were working in, so that was very challenging. And also we were lucky enough in CREID that the FCDO said to us, you don't have to put the UK flag on this. And that was incredibly important for us because the way that things are taken in Iraq and Pakistan and Myanmar in terms of being Western driven or externally driven would have been really undermining of our efforts, and it would have made us much less likely to succeed to the extent that we did. So that was particularly helpful for us. In terms of the US government, keep focusing on religion and conflict, religion and genocide. I've been at a few FCDO meetings. It still isn't always there. I tell Sue every time it happens, and she says, I know, Claire, I know. Look at hate speech, and I know that the online harms bill is going through this parliament this week, but legislating for hate speech is probably not the way forward in some of the contexts around the world that the FCDO is operational in, and you need to use other positive messaging mechanisms. And the one last thing I will maybe say is that, and this is kind of very personal, self-interested on my part, is that I do quite a lot of work, including through CREID, influencing the GSP Plus process in Brussels, because the Pakistani authorities really listen. When they are told that they may lose their trade benefits, they sit up, they notice, they do a few things, maybe not everything we'd like them to do, but they achieve some political change. And when the UK left the EU, we have our own GSP Plus process, but I still don't understand how civil society can get involved in that and whether it's fully functioning. There was a consultation out. I'm not sure where it's got to. We really need to keep our eyes on that and make sure that the UK's trade influence over governments around human rights, around religious minorities is something that we continue to really make the most of.
Claire, thank you so much. I'm really really impressed about the way that, yes, you know how important research is, but only if it's then practically applied. That's the difference, and that's what you're doing, and thank you so much for that. Now, in my role as the Prime Minister's Special Envoy, it's a pleasure to meet some really special people, and people who are making a difference in this field of freedom, religion or belief. And we have one of those people here with us today, someone who I'm sure she will permit me to call her a dear friend, Mariz Tadros, Professor Mariz Tadros. I know there are many accolades that are often used for people in this house, and many of them are exaggerations, but it is not an exaggeration when I say that I believe that Mariz is, in this field of freedom of religion or belief and the whole area that we're talking about today, one of the most inspirational, dedicated and committed, passionate people I have met. As you can hear, I'm a great fan. So we are privileged to have Mariz with us today. She is founding director of CREID and a research fellow at the Institute of Development Studies, specialising in politics and human development in the Middle East. And her areas of specialism include, amongst many others, democratisation, Islamist politics, gender, sectarianism, human security and religion and development. And Mariz, I'm very much looking forward to hearing you talk, particularly as you've been with CREID from the beginning. What are your takeaways from the work of CREID, from the initiatives that CREID has founded over time? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Fiona. This is yes, I'm very humbled by your words. You've always been incredibly supportive of civil society, of collaborations across government and academia and non-state sectors, especially civil society. And I think that's where our strength lies, is when we create collectives across different lines and across different areas, because the issue is so complex that unless we have a very interconnected approach, we're going to be in trouble. An enormous thank you to you, and also to the APPG, to Jim, to Portia, to Andy. I think also, again, the APPG has been so active in emphasizing the idea that this is not one political party's agenda, that unless there is a complementarity, it's almost like the Women's Caucus and its work across the decades, unless there's a complementarity and genuine conversations about where the convergence lies in the agendas across different political parties, then again, we're going to be in trouble. An enormous thank you to the FCDO, in particular Mike Babcock, who started with us the journey at the beginning, and of course Stuart Rosen, who's our current counterpart. But also Claire and Maryam and Jafar and our dear Sayyid Yusuf al-Khoei, who's too unwell to be with us, and others. They are the founders of CREID, because it's a collective of partners across many countries, and the governance is a governance of partners, where the sum of all the different parts of faith-based organizations, as well as human rights organizations and development organizations on the ground, make it happen. And I want to start by just some figures, but then I want to become the devil's advocate and tear apart CREID as an approach. If there are people standing there critiquing the work across 4 years, you know, putting us on an examinations seat and saying this is rubbish, what would they say? And where have we fallen short, actually? And what have we learned from our failings as a program? But first, I'll just share a number of very quick numbers, just to get the big picture, because we've heard a little bit about insights on Myanmar, Iraq, and Pakistan, and how does this all sit together now? So we have about 92,504 sort of said, don't forget the 4, people who have directly interacted with our program, directly benefited from our program. And then about between 1 million and 2 million indirect collaborators or counterparts. These are people who have reached through messages on television or social media and who have interacted through those kind of engagements as opposed to directly benefiting, but it's an indirect benefiting of the program. What we work through is something called action research, which is that we empower local communities to do their own research on their work, because parachuting in researchers from the UK doesn't have the legitimacy and doesn't establish the kind of the nuance and what's going on. So we build capacity locally so that local partners can benefit from the research, because they're the ones that are doing it, but also they're the ones that are documenting what's happening on the ground day by day. So that's the research bit. The action bit is that they are the ones that are implementing the programs. They're the ones that are thinking about the backlash, the countermeasures that they may experience when they engage in the community. They're the ones that have to think of all the unintended outcomes and plan it into their interventions. During the program, we have we've implemented 314 training programs attended by thousands of people. We've published 16 working papers, of which some Fiona mentioned. These are all open access on our website, because we don't believe knowledge should be restricted to those that have access to libraries and universities and so forth. So these are all open access. I think for us what was really important was creating platforms for people in Myanmar or Pakistan or Iraq to actually write their own stories, and then it takes us a bit of time to sometimes translate it and to make sure that safety considerations are in place. But we've had voices of people from across these countries that have been published in 491 blogs, podcasts, and other outputs where people on the ground are telling their stories, and we're creating platforms for them either here or in country through also local languages, so that things are not just for our own consumption, but our things are being digested and engaged with in countries. We have one book out, which you will see, the What About Us, which again is an open access book, and we have 3 more coming out soon. They're just being peer reviewed and that kind of thing. So let me start by saying, well, what are the counter arguments about this program? And I think one of them, which we received in our first year, is there's bits here, bits there. There's a project here, a project there, 51 action research groups. But what does this all add to? Is there a big picture here? Does it all add to something, a big idea? Couldn't this all be scattered and therefore of no effect because it's so tiny? It's so, and I take that point. I think we did purposely design this so that it is off the radar. So it is not all invested in one country, in one project, such that clampdown happens and we have to stop the entire program, because we are working in countries where there's a great deal of repression. And the second thing, which for us is the essence of it, which is none of us, not IDS, not Minority Rights Group, not Khoei, not Refcemi, none of us separately have a monopoly on legitimacy. We are dealing here with minorities who can be Muslim, who can be Christian, who can be Buddhist, who can be Khoei, who can be Sabian Mandian, who can be Yazidi, who can be of no faith, and so forth. And we need multiple legitimacies. We need people who are positioned such that they can speak to the trust concerns of different groups without having to feel that one of them is not really representing them. And I think that's where the multiple legitimacies is so important. For us, that was from a point of recognizing none of us. There is no one legitimacy root or representative. We need multiple legitimacies because people are of faith and no faith in different ways. The second critique, if you like, or devil's advocate argument is, well, surely if the entire Sabian Mandian community is persecuted or the entire Yazidi community is persecuted, why are you focused on the poor? Why are you focused on that particular class? And it is a very class-based approach that we specifically said we will start working with the poor, but not stop there. We need to take it up to the policy level, as Maryam showed and Claire showed. And that for us was critical. It's those intersecting inequalities that for us are critical in the legitimacy issue. It is about the fact that if you are poor, you are likely to have less access to clean water, less access to decent housing, less access to decent employment, and less access to, let me put it bluntly, transport that is sexual harassment free. So it is about those intersections. That's where we need to start. We need to start with those that are living on the margins. We can't stop there, but we need to start there. And that's important because that's where the agenda setting starts. We refused to start with agenda setting among the elites. We said we will set our agenda as a program from the bottom and take it up, but it has to be among those because these are the ones that are experiencing most intersecting inequalities. But then there's a counter argument from the development community. Those that work in international development may come back and say, been there, done that. If you start by working with among the poorest of the poor, then by default, you will get to those religiously marginalized. Why focus on the religiously marginalized? We have women who are marginalized. We have the disabled who are marginalized. We have those that are other than disability and gender, we have all varieties of people who are extremely socioeconomically excluded, including the unemployed youth. Why are we assuming that we need to zoom in on those intersections? Surely, if we have development aid that is reaching or that is designed to reach those that are most acutely experiencing poverty, then by default, religiously marginalized people will be reached. And unfortunately, that is one of the key findings of this program, that it doesn't work this way, that religiously marginalized people are a blind spot, even in international development aid that seeks to be most inclusive, that seeks to be most intersectional in its approach. Why? Well, we've discovered there's lots of reasons, but one of them is prejudice. They get to be overlooked. Another is legitimacy. They don't know how to reach to those that are religiously marginalized because they don't have trust in those communities who are extremely suspicious of outsiders, as Claire said, because of their experiences. Third is because they don't actively seek to include them. We've learned this lesson from making development sensitive to women's empowerment, that unless you actually purposely seek to make development sensitive to women's empowerment, it won't automatically happen. And the same thing here. It does not automatically happen. And we have ended up with humanitarian interventions that are not able to reach those that are marginalized. And that's heartbreaking. So I think these, where are we pushing with this? Well, first of all, in order for us to push forward and continue the work of the sum of all the wonderful parts around this room, the civil society organizations, the great leadership on the part of Fiona, the great leadership on the part of APPG, the media and everyone else, we need to reinstate a commitment to 0.7% of aid going to the global south. We cannot direct aid internally and say this is supporting FoRB. It has to be supporting issues here, but also reinstate. It was this great country that came up with a 0.7% of GNI. From here, that this principle was became a leadership to the rest of the world, that we need that moral and financial commitment. Just as the UK led on through Sir Hans Singer, he was the one that instituted, that led on this principle. Now we need to regain our leadership by putting in the 0.7% GNI. The second thing is that we need to empower champions within the government across different departments and teams to make religious or intersecting inequalities an agenda across all parts of the government, be it the parts that work on gender, the parts that work on governance, the parts that work on conflict, across the board. We need that more interconnected approach by empowering those within the government. I know I have gotten the look, so I better stop. But I think I'll stop there and say, in this program, we've only scratched the surface. We'd be very happy to share with you things that we have failed in this program, from which we've also learned. It's been also an area where things have not always worked out. We'd be very happy to openly and honestly share with you some of those. But thank you so much for coming here to support us. And I think for us it's about an accompanied journey. Now the journeying starts in the next season with all of us working together. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mariz, and I never doubted for a moment that you will absolutely live up to my introduction, and indeed you did. That was a wonderful exposition, and just emphasised again how important it is for us all to work together, parliamentarians, civil society, NGOs, government officials, and so for that reason it gives me great pleasure now to introduce our next speaker, who is indeed a parliamentarian, and one of the great strengths of the All Party Group is our cross-party work, isn't it? It really is something which I hadn't realised till I took up this role, is unique across the world. There is no other parliament in the world with a group like ours, cross-party, working for freedom of religion or belief, and as one of my colleagues said, when we work together on this issue, you can't put a pin between us politically, and this is true. So just before I introduce our next speaker, who's member from, very much a member from a different political party from my own, can I just thank, I didn't appreciate, as I should have done earlier, our colleagues from the House of Lords who are here, Baroness Alone, thank you so much for coming, and our colleague here, Lord. Now I'm so sorry, I know you've come to many meetings, but I'm struggling for a name. Thank you for coming to be with us. Thank you. And so let me introduce my parliamentary colleague here, Lloyd Russell Moyes MP. He's been Labour MP for Brighton Kemp Town since 2017, member of numerous parliamentary committees since then, and taking an active role in many all-party groups, and including the All-Party Group for International Freedom of Religion or Belief. And he's going to speak to us today about what parliamentarians might do to tackle poverty whilst also advancing freedom of religion or belief. Over to you, Lloyd. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you very much. We've heard some really interesting presentations, and thank you very much. I want to kind of start off where you just finished, which was about the UK's role and 0.7. It is, of course, a real disgrace that we have turned it into not only 0.5, but we've turned it into a cap rather than a floor. 0.7 was always an aspiration to meet and then go beyond. And now 0.5 is a cap. So if the government spends in other departments things that could be aid, it reduces the development, overseas development budget. And so that's what you're referring to when you're talking about us spending on Ukrainians, on the housing costs. That comes out, every time we spend housing costs on Ukrainians, the right thing to do perfectly, that comes out of the budget for overseas development directly from that department. And so that, I think, is not even 0.5 target anymore. It is a kind of, we will always spend under 0.5. It is even worse. And why is that important when we talk about freedom of religion and belief? It's because I would put it to you that there are malign actors in religion and belief and development around the world. And I think you see those actors both coming from Saudi Arabia, you see those actors coming from the USA. They are people who often will attach certain religion and belief criteria to their development. Now, I saw this in Kosovo. I worked in Kosovo after the war there, where Saudi Arabia was very determined to put money in about building the mosques and the certain religious infrastructure that they thought was acceptable. Well, Kosovo's population was never a highly religious population, just like Britain actually. Even in Victorian era, never more than a third of the people regularly attended church. Britain is a relatively secular, non-religious country in terms of actively religious, but we are culturally religious. And actually, Kosovo was a very similar kind of country in its Islam. It was, kind of culturally Islamic, but actively it was not. But the aid and development there was attached very much to building up structures of trying to replicate, in that case, more Wahhabi kind of Islam, which is a particularly nasty and aggressive kind of, I would call it a militant version of Islam. Nothing wrong with that if you want to have that as your own belief, but that was not the basis of belief in Kosovo at the time, or really now even. But there was a deliberate act, and there continues to be that around the world, particularly from the Gulf states trying to impose their views. Or we can look at, for example, the role of the evangelical church in America, putting a lot of development aid into parts of Africa, where it comes with strings attached. It comes with strings attached of trying to you have to worship the kind of religion that they are imposing rather than your diminution of it. And of course it comes with, particularly in the fight of AIDS, and I touched on this in the World AIDS Day debate, in Uganda you've seen a real rolling back of the provision of condoms, the provision of being able to teach about the truth about HIV and the way it's passed on, because the evangelical church is trying to impose its doctrine. And there is what I would describe a neo-colonialism in some actors. Now Britain's not immune to this. A lot of religious intolerance and LGBT intolerance and intolerance against women, intolerance against minorities is from Britain itself. You know, we did it in the first wave of colonial and imperialism, so let's not confuse that. You know, most countries were more liberal before Britain arrived. Most countries had more ethnic and religious diversity living side by side before Britain arrived. Most countries accepted more LGBT, gay people, lesbians, etc. in their communities, not with those labels, but in their communities just living before Britain arrived and regulated religion, regulated sexuality, regulated gender. So let's be honest, Britain had a very poor role in that. But I think Britain, we have, the great British story is that we get a lot of things wrong, but hopefully we see pretty soon and we try and correct that. Slavery is a good example. We were the leading force of it, we got it wrong, but we were also the leading force of the abolitionists. We see of our ways. I think that is the great British story. We should not be wedded to that, but we move forward and we are progressives. And with religion and belief and development, I think it is similar. We know the error of our previous ways, and it is therefore almost our duty to make sure we plough in money to development and aid that does not come with strings attached about what you believe, what faith you must worship, or even cultural norms, to say our norm in Britain is that you must be X, and so you must follow that. But actually, the development aid from DFID, and now FCDO, but originally with DFID, because that was the pinnacle, was very much about community-centred aid that actually looked at and tried to find those different intersectionalities, and particularly those intersectionalities that include religion, culture and political belief, which I would describe as the kind of three arms of the same thing, really. You know, kind of, and very often, if you see one attacked, actually you'll see the others attacked as well. You know, kind of very often in places where they are enforcing a political doctrine, they are also enforcing a doctrine around religion, or in places where you are enforcing a cultural doctrine, you are actually enforcing a certain kind of, denying a certain kind of faith. And we see that in Iran, do we not, where both the Baha'i particularly have been harmed over generations, but also an area that I work very much with, because I'm the chair of the All Party Group for the Kurds, and we see there, the Kurds are of multi-faith. Usually faith is not vitally important to them as their core identity, their linguistic and cultural identity is, but there is a common belief in terms of a Kurdish history, a Kurdish common thread, a Kurdish culture, and a kind of a moderate Islam. And you see in Iran how, for example, it was the Kurds that started some of the real protests there of the women refusing to wear the headscarf because of a feeling that the enforcement of for want of a better phrase, a totalitarian kind of understanding of religion. And again, I think it's about religion and politics, because the Iranian system is political as it's much religious. I always think it's important it's not just a religious doctrine. And so British aid and development becomes even more important there. But it does mean that we need to also, as I said, the great British story is we get things wrong, but we see it and we correct it. So where do we continue to need to correct? Well, actually, at home, we need to understand the role that Islamophobia plays in our understanding at home, but also abroad. You know, how do we pull the strings and the heartstrings of aid and charity collections when it is Christian communities or when it is Jewish communities compared to when it is Muslim communities. And there is a difference there, and there is a difference. When I say Muslim communities, I don't I probably mean communities that lay people in Britain would incorrectly describe as Muslim communities, because it is also perception. And that has been much worse after, of course, the war on terror and 9/11, but it has not gone away. And those prejudices also relate into then how the British public wish to focus on poverty alleviation and aid and development. And it is not something that we should stop being critical of ourselves, but also understand that through that critical endeavour, that is how you make yourself better, and you make yourself you make your aid and development more important. And then finally, I wanted to say, I used to sit on the Council of Europe Joint Committee, and this was probably about 10 years ago now, and we launched the No Hate campaign, maybe even more than 10 years ago now. I can remember seeing all the designs, working out what logo we wanted and all that kind of thing, but it seems like only yesterday that we were in some drafty hall in Strasbourg and then in Budapest, actually, because we have a fantastic youth centre in Budapest that I would recommend anyone goes to while it's still there and while Orban still allows it to exist. But that campaign, I think, was also really important, because it was a campaign to try and link people together. And it was, to me, the Sustainable Development Goals came afterwards, but it was the same basis of what we then developed with the Sustainable Development Goals. And that was a basis of saying, aid is not something that you do to on others. Hate speech is not just something that happens in these horrible dark corners. It happens everywhere, in all of our communities. And we have a common cause to stamp out hate speech here as we do to stamp out hate speech elsewhere. And that also is the principle of those Sustainable Development Goals, that we have a lot to do here in Britain to fulfil development, to combat poverty, to make sure, because the reality is that we have awful levels of poverty, awful levels of intersectional discrimination. But to run a campaign that also speaks to people and their intersectional discrimination and disadvantage in other countries and in other areas, and so you make common cause. And you say, we understand that there is discrimination happening here in Pakistan or here in India, or as well as in Britain, as well as in China, as well as in Uganda. And through that common cause and endeavour, you create, I think, a better development and a more stable set of anti-poverty measures. So, but I wanted to say thank you very much for letting me present that kind of thesis, and I do think that we have come a long way, but we still have more to do to combat those intersectional disadvantages, particularly when they are linked to religion, political belief and culture. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That wide sweep, and indeed you have highlighted this big challenge, haven't you? That in decisions regarding humanitarian aid provision, we've been very sensitive to ensuring that we don't discriminate on the grounds of belief. But sometimes that can blind us to not recognising the fact that it's actually a belief that can be a cause of poverty in the first place, often linked with other issues such as gender or culture, but nonetheless, it's somehow, how can we get it right so that we actually don't ignore the faith or belief, because we're so keen not to discriminate in the provision. And that's an interesting challenge, and I think CREID's work is really at the forefront of trying to address this in a very practical way. Thank you so much for all that you're doing, Mariz. I don't know whether we do have any questions. We're pretty well close to time, but if there are some, I'd be delighted to take them, either from our parliamentarians or indeed from anyone else in the room.
I have no questions.
That's very unusual. I am stunned.
But I would like to make a comment, if you don't mind, Madam Chair. Can I just say, all the panels today were incredible. I mean, they all brought a different, diverse and culture and wider point of view, and I thank them all for that. I'm a big believer that within the freedom of religious belief, that we also have the human rights issue. I think they're married. I think we're together in those things. I don't think they can run without the other. But I think Lloyd's right, and I have to say, it may not be everybody's point of view, but I think it's probably our point of view in relation to the 0.7. I'm very clear in my mind that we should be doing that. I'm even more concerned, you outlined it very well, I'm going to say it again, in relation to that cap of 0.5 and what that cap actually means. I think when you think about it that way, which is, you've refreshed my mind on it again, you just reminded me just where we are and how much we've, with great respect, Fiona, where we've fallen perhaps, and where we shouldn't have fallen, you know. As chair of the APPG and Freedom of Religious Belief, it's wonderful to speak up for those with Christian faith and those with other faith and those with no faith. And we've all, as members, MPs and peers in the House of Commons and House of Lords, have always done that in our questions that we've asked in the House, and also our speeches and contributions. And I know we have a cross-party religious viewpoint within the APPG as well, in the different sects. And whether it be the Baha'is in Iran, or whether it be the Shias and the Sunnis, or whether it be the Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia, the Rohingya Muslims, or whether it be the Uyghur Muslims in China, whether it be those small evangelical groups in Vietnam and living in the tribes and are persecuted great, whether it be the Christian Orthodox, it doesn't really matter. We pride ourselves, I use that word, and not to give us pride. Excuse me, I get a boy here, a glass of water. I've been speaking nearly all day, and my voice is starting to go wee bit. But just to say that the APPG and indeed all the members and people who are here will not be found wanting when it comes to speaking up for those across the world. Whether it be disability, whether it be gender, whether it be religious and viewpoints. When it comes to human rights, there's a gentleman who was here earlier, he's just away. I met him yesterday, and he reminded me of some of the things that happened in Pakistan, and we're going to visit Pakistan in February time again. So I'm a bit conscious that I'm not quite sure I see much improvement in Pakistan. I'm not sure if I see much improvement in Nigeria where they're in my time. So there's a lot to do. From my point of view, it's very, very simple. I serve my Lord and Saviour, and that's what it's about. We'll do the best for it.
Thank you very much, Jim. Yes, there is indeed a great deal to do. And I mean, the good news is that increasingly across the world, there's networking going on across civil society, across governments, across NGOs, academia. I can see this from my own perspective. The alliance that I have the privilege of chairing of governments committed to freedom of religious belief, which was founded only 3 years ago. Now, there are now 43 governments committed to that. That's huge development in a very short space of time. And I am very encouraged by the increased joint working that's going on. I think if we continue this, then our collective voice really will be much louder than our individual voices alone. And there's a huge amount of goodwill in this sphere. So you're absolutely right, Jim. Much to do. The position is not getting better across the world in terms of attacks on freedom of religion or belief for a variety of reasons. We know about the increased use of technology, not just in China, but of course they're exporting, China and Russia are exporting technology which can be malignly used to around 100 countries. We see the increase in authoritarian regimes. We've seen that in Myanmar, and then we've seen also now obviously what Putin's doing in weaponizing religion, and the increase in, tragically, in non-state actors now. Nigeria, for example, deeply concerning as to how coordinated they are. We've seen an increase in these Islamic extremists working in several different countries, not just in Nigeria. And then, you know, the tragedy of countries where we've seen freedom of religion or belief so almost decimated. And since I became Envoy less than 2 years ago, it's tragic to see how many countries this has worsened in. I've mentioned Nigeria, I've mentioned Myanmar, but of course Afghanistan is now a place where no one of any belief except supporting the Taliban can live without a constant fear. So there is much to do, but I remain encouraged that there is a great deal of work going on to address this, and some of the best work I have seen, and I say this without a shadow of a doubt, and I'm so pleased that the UK has been supporting and sponsoring it, is the CREID work, because it's absolutely there at the forefront. It's talking with the people who are affected, and it's working out solutions with them, like the street lighting or like the other issues like that, to make a difference in their lives. It's helping them be a voice. So it's not just that we're a voice for the voiceless, which is Jim's wonderful phrase, but giving them a voice too. So thank you so much, Mariz, for all that you've done. I look forward to CREID being a huge voice in this arena for a long time to come. Thank you. Thank you.